Oh, hey y'all. Hey y'all. Welcome to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. Happy Tuesday, everybody. As you all know, this is a true crime podcast, and tonight is no exception. I've got a great case tonight coming to you out of Raleigh, North Carolina. So not very far from where I live, as many of you know. Tonight, I have with me my trusty recurring co-host, who's been on here quite a bit lately. We've got BC Sanders from The Disruptors, if I can get him on the set here. Hey, BC, how you doing?
Hello.
You doing all right tonight?
I'm wonderful.
Well, good.
I was worried I was going to be a little bit late, so I appreciate you being patient.
Well, it looks like you got in right on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody in the chats. For those of you who are just listening and don't know, this is a live show that we air live on the Andrea Up Late channel on YouTube every Tuesday night at 8/7 Central. And so we do have friends in the chats that kind of talk about the story as we go on. We'd love to have you. So if you have not yet been a part of that, go on and subscribe. It's free. Let's do the thing. You can get in the chats and give me your point of view on the cases that we cover. A lot of times we do go over some unsolved missing persons, these types of things. Tonight is a little interesting. Also, let me know in the chats if you're having any trouble hearing me. I'm doing something a little bit new with the mic tonight. So tonight is an interesting case in that someone was charged with the crime that we're going to talk about, and then is very likely linked to another crime, if not more. But there was a reason a conviction never took place. So I'm going to leave you kind of on a little cliff on that one for now. And we'll hear what you have to say about this as it gets going. So I know, BC, sometimes when you're on here, you are not familiar with the cases at all. In fact, if you guys have listened before, a lot of times I like for my co-host not to be aware of what we're talking about, so they can just kind of like listen and react in real time and ask questions as we go over it. But tonight, it sounds like this is a case that you actually are familiar with. And I will let you guys know, if you're not aware, BC is co-host of the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski, and he's a retired homicide lieutenant. So it's always great expertise, a great person to bounce ideas or questions off of when we're talking about these cases.
That's the best idea I've heard all day.
But you're familiar with this case, correct?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay.
But yes.
Uh-huh.
And that department as well. Probably, I think, in the top 3 homicide units in the country for their clearance rates.
Okay.
So we'll talk a little bit later when you get into it about some of the reasons why and that sort of thing. But yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Impressive.
Perfect. I will say, and we'll reference it some, there's a book that was written on this case called The Evil Next Door, and it's The Untold Story of a Killer. And it's by a woman named Amanda Lamb. And Amanda Lamb was actually a journalist, or is a journalist, in the Raleigh area at the time that this case occurred. And so she wrote a book about it. And I like the book in the sense that it's very factual. She was there, I believe, during the court case as things were going down. So the stuff in the book is great, unlike a lot of the stuff you're going to get online. So as is always the case, I found a lot of inconsistencies on things that I was reading and podcasts I listened to and these kinds of things. So let's go on and dive in, guys. This is the case of the murder of Stephanie Bennett. All right. This took place in 2002 in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm going to dive in and then we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. All right. So Stephanie Bennett was born April 30th of 1979. She was born in a little town called Rocky Mount, Virginia. If you're familiar with the Southeast North Carolina, also does have a Rocky Mount, but she was born in Virginia. She graduated high school and attended Roanoke College. Stephanie's parents divorced when she was a bit younger. She had a stepsister. She has a brother, and just a very low risk type lifestyle. Stephanie wasn't known to get into any kind of drugs. She wasn't running with the wrong crowds, just really kind of kept her head down, did her work, and she was in a steady relationship with the gentleman at this time. So she went on to Roanoke College, like I said. She graduated there and she secured a pretty dope job with IBM. So if you can think, Raleigh now and definitely at the time was one of the top techie type places. So if you're thinking like early 2000s when technology was booming, she's graduating college. This girl's on track. So she moves down to Raleigh, not too far from Virginia there, from Roanoke, and gets this job at IBM. So she's starting her career there. Excuse me. So she actually moves in with her stepsister, Diane, and a good friend of both of theirs named Emily. So the three girls were living in these apartments, the Bridgeport Apartments, and the address there is 4101 Lake Lynn Drive there in Raleigh. And it's called Lake Lynn because there's actually a lake. There's a body of water that sits kind of behind the apartment complex and behind kind of a row of trees, if you will. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that apartment looks like as time goes on. But those apartments are still there. There's a lot of apartments, I believe, in that area. Is that right? Kind of like as far as you know, like.
Yeah, that area, the apartment complexes get sometimes pretty large. Mm-hmm. And there are oftentimes tracks and stuff. And in that area, they have walking trails that go all around the lake that can be good or bad.
Sure.
Great for citizens, but also great for criminals or voyeurs.
Gotcha. Well, voyeurs aplenty as we talk about this case. It makes me shudder when I think about what all was going on unbeknownst to the citizens at this time at that place. So Stephanie at the time was dating a young man named Walter Robinson. He was actually living at that time in Greenville, South Carolina, about a 4-hour drive south of Raleigh there. And he was actually an engineer. They had been together for quite some time and had plans to move in together. So once Stephanie had been in Raleigh for about a year, they decide that she's probably going to move on down to Greenville where he is. And in fact, just before this took place, they had plans to view some apartments, I believe, the next weekend. In fact, the day after Stephanie's murder, that was the day that she was supposed to send Walter the lease agreement paperwork to fax into some apartments. So they were well on their way to get out of where she was and move in together in Greenville. So in May of 2002, it was the 21st, actually. Like I said, she was getting ready to fax a lease agreement to Walter. And that evening, she was home alone. Emily had moved out at this point. She had just moved out of the apartment. And Diane, her stepsister, was out of town for a funeral this night. So Stephanie was home alone on May 21st. And that night, she spoke on the phone with Walter and went to bed. I think she got on the phone with Walter around 8:30 or 9, something like that. And they talked for quite some time. And then she went to bed. So the next day, Walter tries calling her. I think it was by 11 when he hadn't heard from her. He starts calling more and more and more. It was a work day, so she was expected to be at work. And she was known to be a very trusted employee. She was always at work. She didn't really ever call out. She certainly didn't just not show up without a phone call. So this was odd to them. So Walter calls her. He calls her family to just kind of see if they've heard of her, right? I feel like every week, here we go. People start making the phone calls and you can see just the tragedy of it unraveling as we know what they're about to find out in that time, right? So he starts calling around. Her friends start calling her. So Emily has called, Diana has called, all expecting to get in touch with her. So finally, her work is getting a little concerned because they're saying it's very unlike her not to show up like that. So finally, Diana, there are some differing accounts of whether or not it was Diana or Emily, but either way, I believe it was Diana, called the apartments to ask the property manager just to go do a welfare check, just go knock on the door, just see if she's, something's up, if she's not feeling well or whatever. They just didn't feel really good about this. So the building manager did knock on the door. She did not receive an answer, but had the permission from Diana, who also lived there, to go on in, just open the door and check on Emily. So at Diana's wish, she unlocks the door and she goes inside, and she immediately calls 911 because when she goes in, she sees Stephanie's body lying on the floor. The 911 call says just that. She says, I need police here immediately. I've got a dead body here. And they said, okay, ma'am, is the person conscious? And she just said, she's dead. And the phone. And that's pretty much the end of the 911 call. But she sees Stephanie's body lying there. What she saw was a huge shock to her, as you can imagine. She was completely nude. She had bruising on her wrists, ankles, and around her neck. She was found with a pair of navy blue underwear. It was her own underwear, stuffed in her mouth, and she had been raped and strangled. There were marks on the back of her neck. We found out later that would indicate a garrote. So like if you picture like you use a tool, meaning like a stick or something stiff to put into whatever you were using to strangle someone with. So you turn it to make it taut. And that's one way these kinds of things happen. And it looks like that's what happened with Stephanie. So as you can imagine, immediately the investigation ensues. This is actually, and this is what we're going to get into, the crazy part of this case is obviously that's the tragic part and it's terrible, but the getting of the bad guy, that's the part in this case that's just kind of wild to me. Homicide team comes on in. They begin working the scene. Everyone in the apartment complex is kind of systematically talked to and interviewed. As you can imagine, this was, as BC said, a pretty sprawling apartment complex. I think it looked then not a whole lot unlike it looks now. Picture multiple, 2-story apartment buildings, or maybe 3-story actually.
I think it may be 3.
I think it may be a 3-story apartment complex. So, but big pool, like he said, walking trails, like, a nice looking apartment for all that sense. But a lot of people, this is a lot of people to comb through. This is going to take some time to get through all of this at this scene. So they start interviewing everyone there and thoroughly combing through Stephanie's apartment. So, tell us just generically, like maybe not necessarily specific to Stephanie's case, but in a case like this with, as far as what we've talked about thus far, what does that look like for a homicide team when they come in?
Yeah, patrol gets there just based off that 911 call. All they'll do is secure everything. Basically, it means don't touch anything, freeze it, just like you see in TV shows or movies. Yellow crime scene tape is put up, and then uniformed patrol officers protect the perimeter. Then homicide team will come in and start to assess, what do we have? Do we have known witnesses? Is the body still on scene? Like some homicides, people will be attacked, then you transport to the hospital, then they die at the hospital.
Okay.
So in this one, you've got a crime scene contained, and you have a decedent inside of a residence. So then homicide team will start getting all that information and then going into action with doing search warrants, interviewing any witnesses, canvassing that apartment complex. So you start knocking on doors. At that time, you may or may not have some surveillance camera footage. So you would want to secure that. And then start to do your victimology, what you know about that person, calls for service in that area. So how many dispatches, 911 dispatches have been there in the last day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You look at the pattern of behavior in that area.
Okay. So in a case like this, I think it seems daunting in the sense that it's not a single residence home. It's a sprawling apartment complex. So do you just, I don't know, does the team kind of start working what you just said, and then extra people go out to start interviewing as quickly as they can whomever is also living there, or no?
Yes, you can. If the agencies are large enough, and this police department is a pretty large police department, the officers can start to knock on doors and triage. A citizen can say, I was at work, I wasn't here. They get their information, they move on to the next one. Once they identify a witness, then a detective normally will do follow-up as soon as possible, either right then on the scene or an hour or 2, 3 later, once they can get freed up to actually take a really in-depth statement to go, okay, yes, this person saw this, or they saw the suspect, they saw the crime occur, whatever it is. So usually from the very beginning, if everybody's doing what they're doing, it all starts to come into to almost like a plan of action. Okay, we've got all this information. Let's go.
Okay.
So that's also why you end up having people talking about homicide units that'll work for 30 hours straight or whatever. It's because of that. You're getting all this information in the beginning. You're starting to do interviews. You're doing search warrants, and one thing leads to another. And you work until you either run out of leads or you have to stop, take a quick nap, and then you get back to work.
Which I think actually happened in this case eventually over, kind of in the overnight hours. And there was a bit of a break with an officer at the scene to secure the scene, obviously, make sure it wasn't tampered with in any kind of way. And then they got back to it. So let's talk a little bit about that and what that crime scene actually looked like. So like I said, well, I don't think I did say, but Stephanie was on the bottom floor, the lower level of her apartment complex. Okay. So we find out later that Stephanie had just told her aunt a few weeks prior that she was so excited to leave. She was ready to leave that apartment complex, that there had just been reports of peeping Toms around the area, or a peeping Tom around the area. And someone had been lurking here and there around some windows near her apartment, near her actual apartment building, her room, in just the days and weeks prior to her murder. So we do have that little tidbit of information we can kind of sit on while we talk about the crime scene. So the window screen to the outside of Stephanie's lower level window, I'll put these pictures up on Andrea Up Late on Instagram, you guys, but the window was very low to the ground. You could easily crawl into it, into her room. And that's, what they believe happened because the door to the apartment was actually locked. There was no forced entry that anyone could find. So that window screen was actually popped out and propped up against the outer wall of the building. Okay, so the window was unlocked and partially raised. So as they look through the area, there were a few leaves right inside the windowsill there on the floor, which led investigators to believe someone had, in fact, popped the window out, just as simple as it looks. Sometimes don't make it harder than it is, right? Pop that window out, climbed right in the window, and brought some leaves with them, okay? So Emily's bedroom, remember Emily wasn't there right then, but down the hall was Emily's bedroom, and her closet was a little different than it had been. So investigators bring Emily and Diana back, when it's safe to do so, bring extra people in to look around and say, what looks different, right? They're going to be the best case scenario in terms of finding out, because they don't know, right? Like these cops can't look and know that this phone usually sits over here, or, this pillow's usually over there or whatnot. So they have the girls come in and look around and tell them what looks a little different. And Emily's closet was a bit bizarre. I got a picture of this as well, but there was a glass of water. And this is a decent sized closet. Like it's a little walk-in closet. Okay. So there was a glass of water, some tissues, and a phone. The phone was actually Diana's phone. And it was a black, like a landline, receiver that sits on the thing and whatever. So, if you remember those phones, guys, if you're of a certain age before cell phones, you could have just actually clicked the little button and removed the receiver. Thank you. The receiver from the actual phone cord, or from the phone cord from the phone itself, the base. And that would render the phone useless. But instead of just doing this, the whole phone is unplugged and taken and sat in Emily's closet. It's not plugged back in, but it's in there. So Emily quickly was like, no, like that. That's never my closet. That's not how that should look. I don't know why this stuff is in here. And that is what led investigators to start thinking, okay, this person probably came in and has been sitting here for a while. This person, at this point, all they know is that it's likely that this person could have been in the apartment while Stephanie was gone, or when she got home, and unbeknownst to her, this dude's lurking in the closet down the hall, which is completely terrifying to think about. So that's what was in Emily's closet. To me, that was the most disturbing, just because it's the most obvious difference in their home. So this is another one. I don't think that you and I have talked about this case just a little bit. I don't know that we've talked about this. There's a running theory that potentially the person had taken pictures of Stephanie. And the reason that's thought to maybe be true is because the bedding, like her bedding on her bed, was very neatly pulled back and laid on the foot of the bed. Like on the foot of the bed, and then on the floor, her pillows that she had, like I guess her girlfriends would say that she usually sleeps with her pillows kind of like in a U shape. It must be how she gets cozy in her bed. They were pretty undisturbed, but there were a couple of things lying, like a picture that's usually they say on her bed. That's what I keep reading, was like was propped up on the floor. There were like 2 or 3 things that were on the floor, but not in disarray, not like they had been knocked off in a struggle. Right. Like they look staged there. And that has led investigators to think that potentially this person was taking pictures of the scene. So in terms of what might have been missing, at every turn, the girls will say that the laundry basket, they can't find the laundry basket anywhere. Stephanie's laundry basket was missing. There was, the girls say that there was one pair of underwear that they know of, like when 3 women are living in an apartment together, what belongs to who, everybody's doing laundry. Like that's not a tough stretch, I don't think, to know this, but I guess there was a certain style and color underwear that couldn't be found anywhere that they think this person, the suspect, took with them. So the laundry basket, the undies, and then the CD player. So the girls will say the CD player was missing. BC and I have gone back and forth on that as to like, maybe it was missing, or maybe they were out of town. Maybe Stephanie lent that to a friend and we just don't know it, right? So sometimes those kinds of things happen in cases, right? I mean, yeah. Can't really hang your hat on that one necessarily.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I don't know, not specifically about this piece of evidence, but in general, sometimes like that things can happen where you think something is missing, and you're having to depend on other people, associates, family members, right, to say yes, that item should be there, and maybe there's an imprint left that there's not dust there, so then you can say yes, that in fact probably was there.
Yeah.
So with this, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we'll learn that it stands to reason that it could have been missing when we find out some other details in the case. But either way, let's just not hang our hat on that one for right now. Now, this is one thing that's interesting to me. I've read in this book that I referenced earlier about the case, and then a few other sources have stated that money was missing from Stephanie's wallet. And I feel like if that were a sizable amount, that could be easy enough to determine how or why, or just that was the fact. But I keep hearing that it was around $8. So, I mean, I don't know. How would the girls know that? How would the girls know that like $8 was missing from the wallet?
That could be if you were checking like bank records or a receipt. So you may have a receipt in a purse or in an area that says, Tuesday at 8:00, somebody went and ate at Bojangles and their change was $8. Mm-hmm. And then now, for whatever reason, you think now it's missing. I'm assuming that something like that, somebody would have to say, yes,
yeah,
we ate, she got $8 back. I don't know. That is a weird one. I mean,
it's another one I'm not really hanging my hat on because I don't think it matters necessarily toward the case. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing to consider, I guess, too, is that in 2002, more people were using cash than they are now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, people had debit cards, obviously, and credit cards, but people were using cash a lot more than they are now. Either way, those were the things that were missing. So we have laundry basket, potentially a CD player, $8, and a pair of Stephanie's underwear. The CD player, by the way, is not anything that you picture. Like, it wasn't like a Discman or like a small, like handled CD player. Is actually a 1995 compact JVC. MSX, I believe, was the model. And it was, if you can remember, because I had one of these, I remember getting it for Christmas. Not in 2002. It was before that. But it's the same idea when I looked this one up. It's the one that like stacks tall. So it's probably 1.5 feet tall at least, and it's got like the stack. Do you all remember that? Like it's like two. It could be like a radio player on the bottom, and then in the middle is like the two cassette tapes side by side places, and then on top of that would be your CD player, etc. So that's what was gone. The only thing also to consider is that maybe the suspect put those belongings that we're talking about missing in the laundry basket. You know, maybe threw a towel or blanket over it and walked it, and that was a way to get out with these things, with these mementos, if you will, without maybe looking so suspect because you're carrying a basket.
Or blend in with basket and items in it,
like you're going to and from your laundry at the apartment.
Yeah, it could very well be that. Yeah.
So that's kind of what we have now. As the investigators look around, they find something else that's super unsettling. Not very far from Stephanie's window, on a bush, was like multiple pairs of women's underwear. And they are kind of, it's described as though someone, you may want to just try again.
Yeah.
It's described as though someone just like, if you can picture someone having a handful of underwear and throwing them up in the air, like meaning like they were laying on a bush, a windowsill, you name it. So they immediately start to think that potentially this was Stephanie's stuff and someone has taken all her underwear after her murder. And then when they start canvassing the apartment complex and asking these questions and interviewing people, you find out that actually there was a teenager that lived in or around the apartment complex that admitted to have been taking women's underwear from the dryer. I think at least one pair has been confirmed to have been Stephanie's, but either way, they weren't all hers. And this little weirdo was just stealing underwear.
Which can completely derail investigation. Maybe not derail it, but definitely.
Well, it did delay because I think it started switching a little focus to that briefly.
Because you would have to rule that out. So immediately when something like that surfaces, then you start to dig in, you start to figure out what you have. The average person will probably be like, there's no way two voyeurs or two peeping toms can be operating in the same area. It's just too much of a coincidence. But we do know if you study cities and geography and lakes and apartments and greenways and things that go around that lap, you know, that then you end up having multiple voyeurs.
Yeah, maybe check. Sam, we got a little feedback happening. So, right. So that's just the thing. I think for a little while they did think that, you know, obviously we have a nude woman who's been strangled, like the super tragic murder that looks sexually motivated or was sexually motivated by nature. And then we have the underwear outside the window. It would seem, like he said on first pass, that this is going to be the same person, but you can't assume. And this is exactly why we talk about you have to work the case and you have to rule things out. And so they have to follow this lead. And again, like you're going to find out when I said at the beginning of the show, voyeurs abound. I mean, this apartment complex, for the saying, you know, for every rat you see, there's 100 you don't. And that seems to be so true at every turn here. And it's super gross and creepy. And I will be honest that if I were an investigator on this case, I would probably have this kiddo's name and information in one of my books that that I'm keeping tabs on, because I wonder what that dude's up to now, the one that stole all the underwear.
Yeah, most units, especially like your special victims units, are pretty familiar with the frequent flyers, the ones who get caught peeping in windows and then they get arrested. They potentially relocate, and a lot of cities can just map those crimes. So if those crimes pop up, you pull up where your sex offenders are registered. You can pull up actual locations where people have been charged with very specific crimes. So certain databases, you can even narrow that search. So now, if a crime like this one had occurred, this homicide, some of those tools would be used to immediately start to identify people in that area that may be working that pattern of behavior. But yeah, that to have 2 or 3 voyeurs operating in one area at one time, one is frustrating because it's hard to catch them. And then 2, in a homicide, it can start to
slow things down a little bit.
Yeah.
Or muddy the waters.
But you got to rule them out, which they did, it sounds like. So.
Which, look, if you were the dude who was stealing underwear in the Bridgeport apartments in Raleigh in 2002, you may have gone on to live a perfectly normal life. But if you didn't, I'm also not surprised.
Yeah.
Because that's not cool. So we had the underwear with on the bushes and whatnot. So basically now the summer is setting in. All right. So that was at the end of May. Now there's not much that can be done. There were fingerprints nowhere. So investigators learned pretty quickly right off the rip that whoever did this was definitely wearing gloves. Not one fingerprint was lifted. They keep the scene. They keep it actually like it is for quite some time. Mm-hmm. Not sure if you know a time on that one. I did read at some point, but it was for quite a while. They keep Stephanie's things. They keep everything like it is. And keep in mind, someone else lived here at the time too. So it's, even though she's no longer there, she moved out. She, is not going to want to stay there. Like these things belongings were still in the home and this kind of thing. So now that they've talked to people in the apartment complex, they start getting DNA. And that's all they've got because Stephanie's body did, in fact, have DNA on it. There was semen found on her body. Depending on the source you look at, it's deemed that there was like a decent amount. So they had no trouble in having the DNA of the suspect, just no fingerprints. So they enter the DNA in CODIS and nothing comes back. So this person has never been registered in that kind of way in the system. So that's their smoking gun. That's what they have to go off of is that DNA. So they start now collecting DNA from family members. Walter, the boyfriend, was very quickly excluded as anybody of interest. He had been on the phone with Stephanie, like I said, that evening, and he was actually using his landline. So with him being in Greenville, South Carolina, like 4 hours away, when they think that she was murdered at a certain time that evening, he couldn't physically have been able to get there and at that time, and there was nothing that pointed to him either way, but he was easily able to be ruled out. In terms of family members, co-workers, these kinds of things, everybody was interviewed. Everybody is willingly giving DNA samples and nothing. So then they start going out, and so I believe the lead investigator on the case at the time was a gentleman named Ken Copeland. And then tell me again, Jackie Taylor's position at that time?
Yeah, so she would have been a detective as well.
Okay. So those two, so he's on it and she's kind of with him. And this female named Jackie Taylor and then this guy, Ken Copeland, are the two that are kind of taking this over. He's kind of in charge of this investigation and how it's going at the time. Okay. So Jackie Taylor was known to say, don't come back to me unless you got 5 swabs. Like if anybody is going out canvassing an area, come back with 5 swabs of DNA, like 5 different people. Keep checking. Don't come back to me unless you have that stuff. So they are compiling DNA after DNA after DNA sample to the tune that I think at some point they have 281, 283 different samples of DNA. I don't know how quick that is to run through the system. Yeah. Are we backlogging here or?
Yeah, that and without going into too much about it with DNA and stuff, those types of samples, while it's cumbersome and takes forever, it obviously that's what you want. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's telling when someone doesn't.
So there was a time when somebody didn't want to. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of people who didn't want to. Mm-hmm. Long story short, I think actually Jackie Taylor got on them and essentially was just like, just do the thing. But they were really hesitant to at first for quite some time, actually. And they did. And these people were quickly excluded. I think it was 2 different gentlemen.
Yeah, because if you're doing 280 plus people and let's say someone out of that sample has committed a crime somewhere that has nothing to do with this homicide, they don't want their sample because then people start to believe this sample is going to be put into a system and they start to say no, or some people are just kind of paranoid in general and they just don't want
me to. And I say it every week. I don't want to take a polygraph. I know we don't things are not hinged on polygraphs. I still don't want to take one because I don't think I'll do well. And even if I'm completely innocent, and I don't think I want to give my DNA because I don't know. I don't want to. I'm not going to do it. So know that if anything ever happens and I'm implicated and I don't give up my stuff, it doesn't mean I did it. It just means I don't.
Well, and as
I've read too many weird things.
Well, and as detectives, we're not going to sit there and go, "Oh, this is the person, slam dunk," but we will look and go, "Okay, well, why is it?" Because there could be a very simple explanation.
Well, that's just it. I mean, I know I can't be charged for not giving my DNA.
Right. Yes.
I can be charged for somebody doing something weird with it. I don't know.
Yeah, DNA is an interesting thing. Because you can get into transfer DNA and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So in this case, thankfully, that's not how this happens. But so they are amassing mounds and mounds and mounds of DNA samples. Okay, like I said, in the 280s in terms of how much they have. So it is insane, but to no avail. And so I believe actually Ken Copeland, one of his phrases was, we just said that the first person who says no might be our guy. Well. It wasn't. It was like the third person, but either way, but there's a reason behind saying that. So this is what they're doing. They're working the case, working the scene, doing the thing, constantly talking to people. Now, finally, sometime in June, they just they're sitting out, like they're canvassing the area. Someone is sitting there at night. Someone's sitting there in the daytime. Just what can we see? Now they start realizing that there had been call-ins of peeping Toms. There had been a peeping Tom seen looking through windows multiple times. Come to find out, the police had actually been called to this apartment complex hundreds of times, like 100s, hundreds of times in the 2 months prior to Stephanie's murder. Okay. So there had been complaints to property management about faulty window locks, about faulty door locks, about windows that won't stay shut. That compiled with the complaints of the peeping Tom. As you can imagine, everyone is on edge. So everyone living in the area in Raleigh, but particularly in this apartment complex now, we've got a dead body and a gunshot wound is no less tragic, but this was a pretty horrific scenario. So, everyone is on edge. So at one point in June, we have cops sitting out. The detectives are kind of just watching, seeing if anything kind of pops up. And sure enough, they see a guy, I almost called him a gentleman, kind of lurking near a window, looking in, and then he begins to masturbate. So they go to him, apprehend him, bring him in, and they're thinking, oh, we might have found the guy, right? Mm-hmm. So they get to talking to him. They get his DNA. He's been hemmed up before on other kinds of charges along these lines. Not a match at all. Not their guy. Mm-hmm. So now we have a woman who has been raped and strangled in her apartment by someone who, for everything we know, climbed through her window to do so. We know she has complained about a peeping Tom. We know we have a teenager squirreling away women's underwear. Mm-hmm. And now we have the guy pleasuring himself outside a window. Yeah. And all in this apartment complex. And he did not kill her.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you get back to, and you've heard me say it, people, you don't get into theories. Like a lot of people will say, oh, what's the theory of how this murder happened or whatever when you're working one. You don't get into the theories. You just focus on, what the facts are and your crime scene. And something like this is where you have to rule that person out. And I would probably bet that at that time, everyone's like, this is our person.
Of course.
Because it does all start to add up. The problem is when it's not your person, and then you go, okay, well, now we're up to 2, 3, 4 people all operating in this apartment complex, voyeurism or peeping Toms, stealing underwear. And then you're still, I'm not saying ground zero, but you're still right back.
Still right where you were.
We're not getting closer to our suspect.
I just can't imagine living there and then being like, oh, they got the guy. He was still in underwear. And like, oh, it's not him.
Yeah.
Oh, they got the guy. He was outside her window doing this. Oh, nope, not him.
Yes.
And knowing that this is what's going on when you go to bed at night. You know what I'm saying? Oh.
Yes.
So they get this guy. He's in and out. He, like I said, does not match. The one good thing and the one bad thing about DNA is that's what you got to go off of. And they have it here, so it's good they got it. But until they can find a match, we're at nothing.
Yeah. So
time goes on. In fact, about 3 years go on. Over this course of time, Stephanie's father has offered up a $100,000 reward to the information, any information that would lead to the capture of the suspect, to match with, I think the city had put up maybe 10 grand or something like that. There's some misconstrued stories on that the apartment put up a vigil for Stephanie. Actually, it was another foundation organization that just used the apartment's grounds to do so. There were multiple memorial services, as you can imagine, and things around town. This was quite a heightened sense of awareness around town at this time, and people were pretty worried about this. This was something that was definitely out of the norm. So finally, more and more time goes by, and then they being the detectives, start going over to this other apartment complex called Dominion. And Dominion is kind of like a tree line away. It's, I would almost say nearly an extension of the Bridgeport apartment. So they're right there, all in the same kind of area. And start kind of cross-referencing that area. One of the Peeping Tom suggestions or call-ins kind of led them in that direction. So then they kind of start asking around there. Immediately, they talk to the manager of those apartments, and that person says, "Oh yeah, I know you're Peeping Tom, the guy that walks the dog." I think they called it a lab. It wound up being a Rottweiler, but either way, a big black dog. His name is Drew Planton. So Drew Planton was the name of the person that this person at this other apartment kind of gave up, saying, no, he definitely is. He's a strange guy. Actually, I believe their words were, he walks the dog. Yeah, he's a strange bird. I think that's what they said to Ken Copeland, who was running the case. So immediately they're like, okay, well, this is a Peeping Tom that we've not talked to yet. And this was, again, guys, this was 3 years later. So now we're into 2005. Okay. So they go to Drew's apartment and he's not there. And they go in the evening and he's not there. And so this goes on for a while. They continue to try to get him at his apartment. They can never get him. So finally they go back to property management and glean where he works. They think, okay, we're just going to pay this guy a visit at his job. All right. So he worked for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture in their fertilizer department, and he was a chemist. So smart dude. Mm-hmm. And this is where he worked. Keep in mind, between Stephanie's murder and now, there has been just kind of like a working composite sketch that they have. A lot of accounts are that someone was tall and thin, maybe not, with glasses. Okay. This would fit Drew, except for it's drawn with someone with really short hair, and Drew has really long, scraggly hair. I'm going to, as I talk to you, for the people who are watching us currently on YouTube, I'll put Drew's picture up so you can get an idea what we're talking about. In Drew, let me first show you Stephanie, though. I want to show you her before I show you him. And again, if you are listening, we will be putting these up on Andrea Up Late Instagram. So that's Stephanie Bennett. That's the victim in tonight's case. And this is a picture of Drew Planton. We're going to discuss why he's strapped into a chair right there with his eyes shut here in a moment. This is also Drew Planton. This is Stephanie with her boyfriend, Walter. Again, for those listening, I'm just throwing a couple pictures so you can get a little idea, and we're going to move it right along. All right, so they go to Drew's work at the Department of Agriculture and go speak with him pretty quickly when they get his name and stuff, right? So they go up to him and they ask him, first question is, hey, we're just talking to people who are in and around the area. Do you know anything or what have you heard about the Stephanie Bennett murder case from 3 years ago? And his first response was nothing, that he knows nothing about it. Well, that's their first huge red flag. I think that Ken Copeland's quote was like, you couldn't be within a 50-mile radius and not know about this case, much less in the apartment complex next to hers. So he says he knows nothing about the Stephanie Bennett murder. And so they say, okay. And they say, well, they're doing the thing, right? We just want to kind of talk to you about it. We're revisiting some things. We haven't talked to everyone who lived in the area at the time. Would you be willing to come down to the station and just talk to us? He did not want to. He refused to come down. And so they're saying the same thing. They're like, look, we have DNA that we just need matched. So basically, if it's not you, this will quickly exclude you from, the list of people we're working through. So, let us get you off our list. Just come on in and let's do the thing. Nope, he does not want to do it. So while he refuses to go to the police station to talk to them, he does agree to talk to them, but on his own terms. So he says that he will talk to them at his own apartment, but that they need to, quote, make an appointment with him. So,
yeah.
So they make an appointment.
Okay.
Have you ever had to make an appointment to talk to somebody?
Not usually the average citizen, and not about something like a homicide. I mean, something that's, and I don't mean, you know what I mean? Like something like that, like, okay, I just need to talk to you. Yeah, to make an appointment's a little strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was his verbiage. So they say, okay, so they do. And a couple days later, they, being Ken Copeland and Jackie Taylor, arrive to Drew's apartment. And Drew has it set up such that they knock and he comes to the door, and he doesn't fully let them in. He lets them in that first door, and then the apartment is kind of cordoned off behind where he's standing. So they're almost in like now kind of a makeshift foyer, if you will. They're just kind of all packed in this little bitty area. Again, he's cordoned off kind of like a wall behind him. And there's a little table, and there are lawn chairs, like camp chairs, sitting out. So there's 2 on one side and 1 on the other. And he tells them they can sit there, but basically you're not going anywhere else. Like, you won't go through my house. So they ask him some questions, and not a whole lot comes down to it. But this is what was their other indicator. They didn't like that he said he didn't know anything about the case initially at his work. But also, while they're at his work, when they turn to leave after they've made their appointment with him, Ken Copeland will say that as soon as they say, okay, we'll see you, let's say, Thursday at 5. When they turn to start to leave, Drew's entire body starts shaking. And Ken described it as though someone was freezing. He said he started shaking so hard that Ken turns back around to say, are you okay? And Drew just said, yeah, I'm fine. But he said from head to toe, his entire body was almost convulsing. He was shivering so hard. So that's not the norm, is it, BC?
No, not at all. That's actually the big red flag that often we look for when we're just doing what we call a knock and talk, or just kind of bumping somebody or talking to them. You start to see physical shaking. Mm-hmm. That's on anything. That's in a traffic stop. That's with someone, hiding something from you. But right. For that, yeah.
Well, and it sounds like, your body can do you can have a lot of like physiological reactions to your emotion, right? We all know that. But it sounds like he was able to keep it together. I mean, just enough to speak to them for 2 or 3 minutes. And whatever heightened sense is happening inside him, the anxieties of all of this inside him, the second they start to turn and his body feels like it can be safe and do what it's going to do, is when it's betraying him. His physical sense is betraying him, because it's going to show everything that he's trying not to tell them.
And that's one of those things. It goes all the way back to an old show, Columbo, the detective.
That was before I was born.
Before I was born too. But that was what he was known for. I don't know. I've never watched the show. But it is an interview technique. It is you encounter someone, you talk to them, You turn to walk away, and then you go, "Oh yeah, hang on, there's one more thing," because now they've fully relaxed. Like they if it's who you think it is, they get fully relaxed, and then you ask them another question, and they have to gear back up.
Columbo.
Yeah, just Google it. It's an old show. I don't know anything about it.
Matlock. Matlock is the one that you used to watch to prep
you
for.
Better Hush.
Right?
Yeah. Matlock.
I believe that's what you would say.
Yeah.
I don't know. They say that BC has like a white suit.
A serious
that he would wear when it was time for some big.
Yeah.
In the big trial days.
Yeah. I wear a seersucker suit.
And you got it all from Matlock. Inspired.
He had a yard sale.
I think that's great.
He did.
You know, Andy Griffith lived here in North Carolina.
Yes. So I have heard.
Not
so I have heard.
Very far from me, and I definitely didn't take one whole day trying to find his house before he died.
That may be one of the best shows. If you want to watch a show.
Matlock?
No, I'm not disrespecting Matlock. I don't actually remember Matlock a whole lot. But Andy Griffith, check it out. Like legit, like how to talk to people and how to diffuse situations. He didn't even carry a gun.
I think in real life, though, he wasn't very nice. I hear that a lot.
I don't want to disrespect anybody, but I have heard that he could sometimes not be nice to people.
Maybe I do want to disrespect somebody. I don't.
Stop.
I don't.
Stop.
Not Andy Griffith.
No.
Or Andy Taylor either, really. Okay, so Drew lost it. His whole body starts shaking, and they think this guy is something. He's worth talking to, okay? So they've made their appointment. They go to his house. Like I said, he's cordoned off a wall. He's got him in this tiny area, and he has them sitting across the table from him, and he only answers what he's asked. He's not providing anything extra. I mean, I think that I would be saying, like, I saw it on the news, and oh my gosh, yes, and let me get you receipts from this, or call my work. I was there that day, or I was at home sick that night, or whatever. So that's kind of that. So now what do they need, guys? What do they need from him? Scream it in the chats. They need DNA, and this guy is not giving it up. He refuses to give any of his DNA up. So what do you have to do? What do you have to do?
I don't know. I was thinking about Matlock. I'm sorry. Yes. No, you have to get a sample either from abandoned property,
okay,
or type of search warrant. What should be known now is if you're doing a search warrant, depending on the situation.
They didn't have PC they didn't have probable cause for a search warrant,
right?
So they could not make the man
yes,
his fluids.
There you go. So what are you going to do? You're going to look for abandoned property. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So once, yes, Carly said DNA in the chats. This is another reason, guys, if you listen but don't get in on the YouTube action, if you do, then you can tell me your answer, or that you can't hear me, or to fix my hair, or whatever.
Or you can click the like button.
You can click the like button or the subscribe button. It's free to subscribe. That's what the next t-shirt's going to say. It should. So yes, we need his DNA. And as BC was saying, we don't have probable cause for a search warrant. So now you've got to be sneaky. This is where it can get a little fun, right? Be sneaky. Once someone has discarded their trash and it's on the curb, it is now no longer their belonging, meaning you can take it. You can wait for them to go to bed. You can pick that whole big old trash bag out if you want to and go through it. So they kind of start paying attention to trash. There's nothing. You guys, this dude is meticulous about hanging on to that DNA. He's not letting anybody have anything, to the point that he's flushing napkins. He's carrying things with him. They follow him as he goes. They watch him at restaurants. He only eats finger food. He hangs on to everything. So what they decide to do then is go to his place of work again. Keep in mind, if you remember where I told you, I probably said BC Nikki. If you remember what I told you, he worked for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. So that is a government-run employment, right? So what does that mean? Well, it's the government and nothing is yours, meaning nothing is your personal property there, including his workspace. So investigators can go to his workspace and they can obtain things from there without it being an invasion of any kind of privacy. He can't turn around and file a civil suit or, a suit on him or whatever. He's not going to IA for this. But they don't need him to know that they are fully doing it, because they're waiting. They have to wait for him to mess up, meaning act like a normal person. because right now they can't obtain anything from him because he's not giving up anything with DNA on it because he knows what they need. Remember, he's a chemist. The dude's a weirdo, but he's not dumb. Can you be a weirdo and be super smart? Yes, you can. And he was. So, well, it kind of goes along. Can you be a creep and not a murderer?
True.
Yes, you can. So this guy, they talked to his boss. It's a woman named Joanne Riley. Initially, Joanne was always very willing to help. And she and Ken Copeland got to emailing each other after their initial meeting about Drew Planton pretty early on. She was always willing to help, but initially she was pretty insistent that she didn't think that Drew could have done something like this. She thought that he was odd. She knew his behaviors at work were a bit different than that of your normal coworker, but she did not think that he could have done something such as rape and strangle this woman. But she agrees to help, and help she does. This woman is amazing. Again, it's this book that I read kind of goes into some more detail about the way that Joanne was able to help detectives there, but she was ready to be at their beck and call. And so she starts thinking about ways that she can help them get DNA. So for instance, sometimes Drew would ride his bike. So she knew that they were going to try to swab parts of his bike to get DNA. She even sent an email to Ken once to say, like, how's that bike swab working out? I think he rode his bike to work today. If you need to come back and grab it, So she at every turn is like keeping an eye out, looking around corners, trying to anticipate this. But she's noticing that Drew is getting more and more bizarre in his behavior. So where he used to never eat anything at work, and in fact, when it was his lunch break, he would just still sit at his desk and not eat or not leave or not do anything. He got to where he'd sit in his car for, 20 to 30 minutes. This was an old clunker of a car, no AC, but he would sit there in the North Carolina summertime and silently just stare ahead, and then come back into the office building. He was starting to just make some different choices aside from his normal kind of bizarre behavior. All right. But at every turn, she can't get anything. So if he uses, let's say he chews gum, he puts it in a napkin and puts it in his knapsack to take home. If he uses a straw in a drink, he then rinses it and puts it in his backpack and takes it home with him. So at every turn, she can't get anything. And she knows that he can't be onto her trying to get something, right? Because that's going to mess everything up. So this goes on. And finally, she even has the idea. She said, look, how about this? There's going to be XYZ going on next week. How about if I have an ice cream party and I will use that and get a stick from like a popsicle from him. So she wasn't sure if it was going to work because he didn't often eat at work. But he did this time. He wanted this ice cream. In fact, I think he ate 2 or 3 bars of this. They go back and forth if it's ice cream on a popsicle stick, whatever it was. But there were different colors. So Joanne, you guys keep in mind, this is a civilian co-worker of a guy who at this time may or may not have been this horrible murderer. And she's helping detectives. And so she's saying things like, okay, I might need y'all's help with this, but I think if I do this, this could do it. So she gives Drew his ice cream. He picks the red ones. So he eats 2 or 3 of those. And then they've all, meaning like the fertilizer department where Drew worked and the rest of the company has now moved into this big gathering space for like a retirement party. And she realizes that this is her time. She can maybe scoot away and get to Drew's desk and obtain his popsicle sticks he'd eaten off of. She had even gone to the lengths of waiting to see which ones he ate to know what color she would eat so that she could then take those red popsicle sticks that she had and switch them with his so that he wouldn't know that his had been taken. Mm-hmm. So she gets brave and she's getting more nervous though, because now his behavior, like I said, is changing even at work. He's starting to shake at work now.
Okay.
He's starting to shake, and another upper management person has mentioned to Joanne that Drew's starting to act funny, and have you noticed him shaking lately? Mm-hmm. His body's shaking. So he's like oozing. He's already kept this in for 3 years. So now he knows police are onto him, and his body is oozing evidence of him feeling the guilt or feeling that he's going to be caught, right? And so they're typing out the lyrics to I'm a Creep in the chat right now, and I can't look at it because now like my head's I'm singing the whole song.
Well,
right
I got distracted and thought, well, this Stephen Williams guy's had enough. He just said, what the hell am I doing here? I'm like, gosh, he helped us out earlier. It was like, hey, there's a little feedback. Now he's like, but now I see it's
the whole, they're typing the whole lyrics to the song, and it's playing in my head. So maybe I'll just sing it before the show's over to get it out of my head.
Playing in your head like a radio. That's a stupid joke. Just go ahead.
Like a Radiohead?
Yeah. Let's not make jokes. BC. Let's just go ahead.
So anyway, so like I said, she's getting a little nervous because he is getting more and more bizarre at work. And he either didn't do this or he did a really, really bad thing. And that in and of itself is terrifying that she's working alongside him. So this day, they've all gone into the other like meeting area, and she goes and she says she was a nervous wreck. And she goes to his desk, and as she gets closer to his desk, she can't find the popsicle sticks anywhere. So she looks around and slowly starts to pull open his desk drawer, and they're in there. So he's already put them away. He hasn't put them in his backpack yet, which is where we know they were probably going to go, but he hasn't put them away yet or put them in there yet. So she sees them. And then she'll say like her nerves got the better of her. She was terrified then that she had her popsicle sticks in her hand. She's going to make the switch, but she didn't know if she could do it in time. And then she hears like one of the doors open or shut to the department she was in now. And so she quickly shut his desk drawer, her stick still in her hand, turns around and basically runs smack into him. This sounds to me like a creepy show you're watching or something, where the quiet guy's just staring at you, because that's what he did. He just looked at her, and she made some, excuse, some blah, 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 and kind of walks away. And as she walks away, she opens the door to leave. Or I think she kind of made herself look busy at a different desk on a computer for a minute. And when she glanced over at him, he opened his desk drawer and pulled his popsicle sticks out, wrapped them in a napkin, and put them in his backpack. Mm. Oh, it makes me nervous telling that part of the story.
Also, if you're the person trying to get that sample and you're not trained and you're not used to doing this stuff, she herself can give those signals. Her own body language.
Well, and that's and the thing is, she's smart enough to know that. So you're aware enough, I should say, to know that.
Yeah.
So she's terrified that she, like you said, that she is going to give off.
Yes.
She's going to tip him off somehow. Mm-hmm. At this point, she said, and whether he did or did not, she thinks at this point he's onto her being onto him, and maybe maybe not.
Yeah. Well, also you do that like when you're doing surveillance, when you're working somebody.
They can see me. They know.
You start to think they see me. There's no way they can't see me, and then you yourself,
because you're so hyper focused.
Yes. Yeah.
So that came and went. Ice cream party was not a success in that sense. So they decide the department's going to go out to none other than Golden Corral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As where every story should end is Golden Corral. So anyway, they're going to Golden Corral, and they think this is it. This is, keep in mind Jackie Taylor and Ken Copeland are still in the case, and they're like, this is where we're going to get this guy. It's a buffet. It's whatever. Surely he's going to leave something behind. He can't be this meticulous all the time, right? So he was for a while though. So they've got some plainclothes detectives at the restaurant there, watching, observing any piece of evidence he can leave behind. If he wipes his face with a napkin, whatever he does to be able to obtain that and bring it back, right? This has been going on for a little while. And so now, talk about cat and mouse with this. And he fully knows that they want this. He knows what he's doing. So every time he wiped his face, guys, with a napkin, he puts the napkin in his pocket and gets a new napkin. Every time he drinks out of a straw and gets up and goes to the restroom, he takes his straw with him. When he's going to the restroom, he's actually flushing the napkins that were in his pockets, and flushing the straws, evidently, from some reports. Either way, he's not throwing them away, and he's not leaving them there at the table. Actually, he went so far as to wipe the rim of his cups and then take his straw and go. So he's like leaving nothing. Mm-hmm. You know what got him?
What's that?
Banana pudding. So then he goes and gets that nasty Golden Corral banana pudding. I'm sorry if y'all, unless you're Golden Corral and you want to sponsor Night Shift. Outside of that,
that's a good idea.
I have nothing great to say.
All they got to do is switch up their banana pudding recipe.
That's it. Right. Or the dishwasher. So, and let me tell you why. So the one, no, Stephen Williams actually just said, is this the guy who smokes and eventually tosses one behind work? No, I did cover that case though. And there have been many unsolved cases solved with DNA found on cigarette butts. Oh, so yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you are a smoker and you have done something bad, don't toss your butts. Also don't litter, please. So he gets this banana pudding. He has exactly 2 bites of the banana pudding. And afterward, he takes the fork that I guess he might strangle and murder you, but he will not steal Golden Corral property. So he's not going to take the fork and put it in his backpack. Instead, he's just going to clean it. So he, after taking 2 bites of banana pudding, proceeds to clean this fork for about 5 minutes, they say. He is meticulously cleaning between the prongs and, all over the handle with a napkin. 5 minutes is a long time to sit there and do this. Puts the napkin in his pocket, lays the fork down, and is on his way. Of course, they go on and scoop that fork up, right? So they get the fork, bring it back. They run it for DNA. It's inconclusive, though, partially. So they get 2 hits on it. They get 2 DNA matches, 2 DNA hits. One is a bit of a stronger match than the other, and the stronger one is that of like an individual female. So we know that's not his. The second one they get is not enough to be admissible in court, but what they do have is a match enough of his that they cannot rule him out now. So it's still inconclusive. They can't jump the gun. I will say I give them credit here. We talk way too often about cases that are rushed and they just want to secure this conviction. You got to think, guys, now it's been 3 years since Stephanie's murder. They really want they want this to come to a close and they want it done, but they want it done correctly. So in this sense, they didn't try to submit this fork with this kind of partial DNA evidence. They knew that this was just not going to cut it. In fact, I was listening to an interview with the assistant DA at the time, and she was saying, like, we know better, so we're going to wait. We just got to get a better sample. But they actually were encouraged and motivated by this. They didn't get too discouraged by that. So now they're kind of back to square one with work, and we've still got Joanna Riley helping them out. And so then they were like, he has these gloves that he wears. And when you wear these gloves for the evidently then, at least, if not now, the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, your gloves are assigned to you. They are yours. Like my gloves would be personal to me. And then UBC would have your own gloves. They may have different markings on them, different, whatever. But either way, everyone has their own. You don't share. You don't mix them up. And they're like signed out to you. So he has these gloves. He doesn't often wear them. So Joanna's like, I can put him on a limestone studying project and he'd have to wear those gloves. And if he wears his gloves, then you guys can maybe swab the gloves for some DNA. Could you do that? And they're like, yeah, we could do that. And so they kind of worked together to do this. But then detectives were a little bit leery about this too, because they thought if we take one or both of these gloves, he's fully going to know it. And so the thing is, guys, here's the deal. He knows they're onto him. They know he knows they're onto him. The reason they don't want to make it so obvious is because they're afraid he will kill himself or flee. So that's why, it's like they are playing this cat and mouse, and it's like, I know, I know, right? Back and forth. But they're trying to keep him from making any other big moves, like just go, you know what I mean? So that's why they're being really careful with this. So eventually they do decide, they say, fine, we're just going to do it. We're going to swap out these gloves with another pair that look exactly like them. I think this guy would probably know, they think he's going to know. He probably did. So they take them for a little while to get the swabs they need and then return them. And sure enough, this secures what they need. So they get the match that they've been waiting for 3 years. So Drew Planton's DNA matched fully with the DNA found on Stephanie's body. Okay, so they arrest him pretty much without incident. They get him there at work. There was a little bit going into how that happened, but they get him there, and go on and proceed to take him in and await trial. They are trying him under, capital punishments on the table. Everything's on the table at this point. They've got exactly what they need, and that is the DNA. And that's why I said earlier, DNA it can be frustrating. It can be amazing because when it matches, and there's no getting around that. Would you say that that's the case, BC?
Yes. And you've got him, he lives in the apartment complex at the time. Mm-hmm. Even his bizarre or abnormal behavior supports that. Most people don't scrub a fork for 5 minutes.
Right.
I mean, all of that. Also, when you're trying to get a sample like that, it motivates you because you're like, well, we know this is our guy.
Yeah.
And he's actually doing more and more to avoid it. So we're going to get it eventually, but yes.
Yeah. Exactly. So they bring him in and that's what they've got. Now comes the strange part, right? They search his apartment. I was trying to see if I could find where it says, I've got the book right here, but they search his apartment and find, let's see here, all sorts of things. They do find multiple weapons, like multiple guns, some knives, a sword. I've said it before. I don't care how many guns you have. We start getting into swords and I get a little weirded out. But
I'm sorry. I never thought about that, but
do you have any swords?
I don't have any swords. What am I gonna do with a sword? I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that in a disrespectful way towards sword owners of America. Yeah. I just mean like, I don't know what I would do with a sword.
No, I mean, now if a sword company wants to sponsor Night Shift, I'm open for that as well. And I'll put swords in my background. Okay, well, I can't find it in front of me right now. I'll put it up later. But either way, he had a lot of guns. He had some knives. He had swords. He had a pretty extensive pornographic collection. Mounds and mounds of that. And then some other interesting things. So they find some mail that has like a couple of pictures of this young woman in it. And it's mail that she has received and mail she has sent off. A woman named Rebecca Heisman or Huseman. I'm not sure how to say her last name exactly. Well, Rebecca Huseman was unknown to North Carolina authorities, but they wonder why he's got all these trinkets of hers. So they kind of start looking into who she is and realize she was actually an unsolved murder from 1999 around Lansing, Michigan. Okay. Silly, if you're in the chats, tell me if you've heard about this one. We got some listeners in Michigan. So they call Michigan authorities around Lansing and ask about Rebecca. And sure enough, in 1999, Rebecca was working as an exotic dancer as a way to kind of pad the bank account for her upcoming wedding. She was living with her fiance and they just kind of wanted some extra money for the wedding. So she was doing that part-time at night. She had come home one night, pulled into her driveway. All accounts make it look like she had started to get out of the car and was shot in the face. One single gunshot. She was not sexually assaulted. There were no footprints. There was nothing anyone could find, footprints, fingerprints, anything at all. The boyfriend at some point wakes up in the middle of the night, realizes she never came to bed, looks outside, sees her car there, door open, finds the scene and calls 911. He was immediately, taken off of any kind of list. He was never looked at as a suspect. Well, now it's 2005. It's 6 years later. And the mail, the envelopes and things like that Drew has that belonged to Rebecca were from 1999. They were leading up until literally the month that she died. Mm-hmm. And to seal that deal, Drew Planton was in college in Michigan, not far from where Rebecca lived at the time of her murder. So then on top of that, a 45 that Drew had in his home matched the ballistics because the only thing they found at the crime scene at Rebecca's house was a casing. So they take that casing and it matches immediately directly to Drew's 45 that is currently in his home in 2005. So now Drew's on the hook for Rebecca's murder. All right. So it gets stranger and stranger. So when Drew gets brought in to be questioned by authorities after his arrest, he shuts his eyes. The picture I showed you a little bit earlier where his eyes are shut, that's how he remained. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't open his eyes. King Copeland was to say later that he believes that he fully believes that in Drew's brain, you know, if he didn't open his eyes, he couldn't see what was going on, like that it just wasn't going on. And so he refused to eat, drink, stand, talk, open his eyes. So when it came time for him to go into the courtroom for different things, he was like strapped to essentially like a rolling, you know, upright gurney type thing. I always think of Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what they do.
That's that's also, I think, like the pop culture reference. That's what you see in your brain, but that's what it looks like. And his eyes are shut and they wheel him in. He refuses to cooperate, refuses to speak. This goes on for a while. But then eventually, not too much after that, he was on and off a suicide watch and psych protocols and this and that. But eventually in 2006, Drew Planton did secure a plastic bag, covered his head with it, and removed elastic from the fitted sheet in his room. Something that I read said he suffocated himself. Something else says that he hung himself or hanged himself with the elastic. I think it was, you know, I think he did both measures. Or I know he did both measures, but either way. So he actually committed suicide and was not ever around to be convicted. But as far as anyone on the case, including Stephanie's family, is concerned, he absolutely was the guy. I don't think there is any question in that whatsoever. And now we know about Rebecca, and now we actually think there's a couple of others that they're looking into to potentially put Drew in with.
Yeah. When we were talking about it earlier, and I may have mentioned, maybe not, like geographical profiling. So when you look at murder occurring in like those apartment complexes or in those areas, and then usually, I mean, it's all kind of common knowledge now, but 25 years ago, investigators were looking at tools that were newer like that, like geographical profiling. So you look at an area and you go, okay, the offender's going to live in this area because they're familiar with it. They're in and out of the area. So when you look back at Lansing, you would do the same thing. You would look for anything that matches kind of his signature, his MO. It seems like with the Lansing murder, it was a shot, shell casing recovered, and not a whole lot that stands out in that crime compared to the way he committed the murder with Stephanie Bennett. So at that, between those years, like we've talked about, I would assume there were other murders. I don't know. I don't see the transition from that Lansing murder to Stephanie Bennett without having something else occurring in between there.
Well, that's quite a heightened escalation at that point. I know time has gone on. I mean, so there could be practice there, but keep in mind, this dude it gets creepier than we've talked on, I guess, because when they search his house, they also found some evidence that indicates he likely had either another victim lined up, or someone just got lucky and he picked Stephanie instead, because there were photos and clothing and a used tampon all together in his house, and like a VCR, like a tape that had either like a prom or a graduation on it. And when police looked at that tape, they were able to pull out and recognize a person there that was actually a woman who lived on the second floor apartment there at the Bridgeport Apartments where Stephanie lived. So when they confront her with this, she says, no, that's my tape, but I don't understand. Like, I have it right here. So she goes to check in her home and she has it there. So they know now that Drew had actually gone in, secured her tape, at some point made a copy of it, returned her tape, and they do believe the used tampon to be hers. He also had in his home duct tape, zip ties, and a door picking set, like a door lock picking set. So it sounds like he had been going in and out and becoming more brazen, more comfortable with not only being a peeping Tom, because he was known to do that. Remember, that's what the property manager at his apartment said. Like, no, he's the guy that walks the dog and looks in windows. So we know he had been a peeping Tom. That escalated. Who knows what he was doing in Michigan prior to Rebecca's murder. Some theories are that he had kind of developed a fixation on her either at the club she danced at or even just, I could see him just looking at her home. That's what he seems to enjoy so much. Or maybe it started there at the club. We don't know any of that. And he was, he killed himself before he was even able to be, before he was, I think, fully charged with her murder, to be fair. I'm not even sure if he was ever indicted on Rebecca's murder yet. North Carolina and Michigan started kind of going back and forth on as to whose he was first. And I think they actually were going to let Michigan take the wheel on that one, in the sense that even though North Carolina worked it, they were going to let Michigan kind of run him first, because then that would set up their case for capital punishment even better in North Carolina when you had that history. And then this case with Stephanie. So they thought they could secure the death penalty even more easily if you already have the Rebecca case in the books.
Yeah. And also you look at, you're dealing with two separate judicial systems, like two different states having the charge, potentially go in front of a judge in another jurisdiction. So all the logistics into that too. So
yeah, it was going to be a nightmare, but that's how they looked like they wanted to kind of work it out a little bit. But in saying that, we do talk a lot of times about the why on the show. I like to talk about the why behind the things, and or how things got to where they were. And so we know that he's playing these games, or he's starting to get this excitement. He has to be deriving pleasure of some sort from using his lock picking set and going in and out of these women's apartments, and like kind of just like taking little things, like hoarding things around, away like a little crow kind of, and taking them back to his apartment. And that gives even more light to the idea that he was just kind of holed up in Emily's room the night that Stephanie got home, had her phone call with Walter, gets ready, and goes to bed. And so the theory is that he waited for her. If you were inside Emily's closet and the door's cracked, you can see into Stephanie's bedroom. And they think that he waited for her to go to bed, be without all her faculties. She's relaxed, the lights are down, and that he quickly took her and tied her up. Now, listen, she had, I told you before, she had bruises on her wrist, ankles, and neck to indicate she had been bound. They say that it looks potentially like handcuff marks on some of the things I've read for her wrists and ankles. I don't know if those were found in the home. I've not read anything to know that for sure. As far as I know, as best I can tell, the instruments used to bind her wrists and ankles, and then the ligature and like garrote used to strangle her around her neck. There's a 13-inch bruise around her neck, and indentation from that garrote has not been found to the best of my knowledge, unless I don't know. So if that was uncovered in the search in his home, I've not read anything about that. But either way, sounds like she went to bed, and then that's when he swooped in. But like we said, that's quite a different method and escalation. Now we have the sexual component. We don't know that he didn't have the sexual component as well with Rebecca. It sounds like he got startled. That's what a lot of people kind of think on that one, that maybe he advanced upon her. She was, I think, a little bit bigger than him. Like, she was like a fit girl. She was in shape. He's this scrawny guy. And it sounds like she might have started to scream, or in some way a struggle didn't really ensue. It sounds like he kind of shot her and left. Like, and like you pointed out before, maybe it was even an accidental shooting. And he, hightailed it out of there. But either way, as far as we know, there wasn't the sexual component or motivation there. So I don't know. We'll see if, anything else comes about, or anything unsolved comes back to Drew. But I will say that when they speak of shaking Drew's hand, and I believe, I could be wrong, I feel like it was Ken Copeland who said this. It could have been a different investigator, but that said how incredibly strong his handshake was, kind of like disarmingly so, and unassuming. That it didn't match with his body or how he looked. Like he was frail, to the point of when he refused to eat when he was awaiting trial, and he was like for a while not eating or drinking or anything. They were concerned that it might be a hospital visit because he was so frail. People at work would say that they actually tried to give him food here and there because he looked like he needed to eat at every turn. So I'm just saying that to say that they said his handshake was extremely strong and just kind of, I don't know, they didn't, suspect that. But I don't know. Is there anything about this case that we haven't talked about that you wanted to shed any light on?
I think that when the arrest was made, and the photos began, the footage started coming in of his arrest photos, the news, online, you can see him. You showed a picture earlier where he's closing his eyes, and very rarely do you see that where someone completely shuts out. And I think Ken's right. It's like a kid saying, I don't see you, you don't see me.
This isn't happening.
Yeah, almost going into their own head. Because I have to assume too, I don't think he ever served any kind of time in prison, and he would have to assume, he's not going to do well in prison.
There's no history of prison in his record. Really quick, and we are going to wrap it up. This is kind of going long, but his history is just such that his dad wasn't really in his life past a certain point. No big abuse. His brother kind of speaks out. There are 4 boys in his family, and he is the third of 4. So the second youngest out of the 4 boys, and his youngest brother has spoken out. He's written a lot. You can find a lot of articles from him. Reddit has a lot of links to articles that his brother wrote about their childhood growing up. But his parents split when he was young. Eventually his mom got like 2 or 3 jobs and then went back to school as a single mom, raising these 4 boys, got her law degree, like huge props there. Gets her law degree, moves them. They were at Michigan, then they move again. And that's kind of how this goes. And that's his backstory. We don't know of any terrible stuff. I will tell you this, though. Out of the 4 boys, the oldest boy and then Drew are cut from the same cloth, because the oldest son, an adult, he now, I think he has like some sort of a construction company. I believe his name is Donald, if I'm not mistaken, Planton. Got arrested and charged with being a peeping Tom in a whole different state at a whole different time.
Yeah. I think that there are people who are hardwired towards a lot of this type of behavior. It seems like Drew was probably hardwired that way. Like there's just something in him that he is attracted to that type of violence. So I don't know. We don't have a whole episode to go and dive into that, but
I said Reddit. My phone just lit up on Reddit. That's weird. I just got a Reddit notification.
AI.
It's listening. Yeah. I don't know. It's a crazy case, but like I said before, it's tragic and it's terrible and it's senseless. It's all the things. But to me, the interesting part was like this cat and mouse game, man, with that Drew.
And also, some people will talk about a cold case. Most units that work those just call them unsolved because they're not. I mean, like this case, in that sense, they're working it and they're working their leads. But because time has passed, people would say, "Oh, well, that's a cold case." It's kind of a little semantics, but it's that idea of a lot of cases that are unsolved. You go back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
And a suspect is almost 90% in that report of that initial investigation. So when you actually work one that's unsolved and it's 10 years later, 15 years later.
I don't think Drew is in this one.
He may not have been.
I don't think so, because I think they didn't know to necessarily, hone in on the Dominion apartments right off the rip. But
it would be interesting to see if he was in the initial canvas to see if, I'm assuming not, because he probably would have stood out, but either way,
nothing that I read said so, but we'll see. I don't know. Well, hey guys, listen, I really appreciate you all here and listen and being in the chats. If YouTube is not your thing or you can't show up on Tuesday nights. You can always watch it on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. And then past that, you can listen wherever you stream. So your iTunes, your Spotify, just type in Night Shift with Andrea Up Late and you'll find it there. This is like season 2. So I think this is maybe the 11th episode there on the second season. So go back and listen to what you haven't listened to yet. And definitely please like and subscribe and all that good stuff. It's slowly growing again. So I appreciate all of that. And then while you're at it, go check out BC Sanders over at the Disruptors with BC and Ski. And they have their own YouTube channel as well. You can hit them, give them a like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And it's of the same name as well. And so you can check them out on Instagram and all the things. I think we got all the names on all the things.
Yep.
So just start clicking through and hitting all the buttons. But
yeah,
no, we really appreciate you guys. And BC, I appreciate you being on.
Of course.
And helping me out here tonight and providing all of your expertise. I know that Matlock is almost on, so
all right.
You probably better get to scooting.
I think you got to go listen to Mambo No. 5. That's your favorite song, right?
I hate that song.
There you go.
It's terrible. All right, guys. Listen, we will see you guys soon, and I appreciate everything. I'll keep y'all up to date on some merch that's coming out. Faulkner, don't forget you're getting a free something, whatever. It was going to be a t-shirt. It might be something cooler. We'll see. But we will see y'all next Tuesday.